Well, look, big news coming out after a successful reign until this season. What's your first reaction to the news?
Well, it was expected, to be honest, because despite the speculations, despite what we've been told over the last days after the Champions League final, the expectations was to see Simone Inzaghi leaving Inter. And I think it's interesting what you were just reading, the statement of Inter and Giuseppe Marotta, the president of the club, is that they are saying it's a mutual decision. Well, that's a bit surprising because we have been told over the last days that the position of the club was that they wanted to continue with Inzaghi. Marotta spoke after the game against Paris Saint-Germain and said that we want to continue with Simone Inzaghi. Well, if it was mutual decision, probably wasn't that the case. And I think it's interesting to see now the club going to another direction. Probably that's what they wanted. And as you mentioned already, the main two candidates as things stand are Cesc Fàbregas and Roberto De Zerbi. I think overall it was an important tenure, the one of Simone Inzaghi of Inter, 6 trophies, the second star of the club. So I think it will be remembered with a lot of trophies, of course, but also the big disappointment of the 2 Champions League final lost, especially the one against Paris Saint-Germain, especially because it was 5-0. So it was a big disappointment for the club and the fan base.
Francesco, the timing of all of this and the connection between Inzaghi and the Saudis was a little bit curious because it came up prior to their biggest game of the season, obviously the Champions League final against PSG. You're based in Milan. When you speak to the Inter fans there, are they a little bit frustrated about how these connections between the manager and a potential move kind of overshadowed the final a little bit, particularly in the press?
Absolutely. I think that was the case also in 2010 when Jose Mourinho left Inter after winning the Champions League and joined Real Madrid. But probably it was different. It was different because Inter already won 2 titles before. No, one was the Serie A and the Coppa Italia, and then won the Champions League with Jose Mourinho against Bayern Munich. Here it was completely different because Inter had a big disappointment by losing the Serie A title. Also were knocked out by AC Milan in the Coppa Italia semi-finals. So I think that it's a bit unfortunate the end of the tenure, the spell of Simone Inzaghi at Inter. And also, it's probably true that he started talks with Al-Hilal before the Champions League final. So it's not something that it started just in the last 2 days. So I think that's a bit disappointing to see a manager like Inzaghi agreeing terms with Al-Hilal before the Champions League final. But also, on the other hand, we have to say that regardless what was the outcome of the final in Munich, probably was already and anyway was the end of the Simone Inzaghi cycle at Inter. We are looking here at the words of Simone Inzaghi today after the official statement of both the club and the manager. And it was, of course, very, very emotional because after Lazio, he did very well at Lazio, of course. But then when he joined Inter, let's remember also when he joined Inter, Inzaghi. He joined Inter a few days after Antonio Conte decided to step down because the club told him that they needed to make some exits because the financial situation was difficult. They had to sell both Achraf Hakimi to Paris Saint-Germain and Romelu Lukaku to Chelsea. So not many managers probably want to take that job. And Simone Inzaghi had the courage to take the job and becoming also one of the, after Heleno Herrera and Roberto Mancini, was the manager with most titles won at the club. So it was a big moment also for Simone Inzaghi's career that now will take into another step.
And looking at these numbers here, 65% win percentage. It was a successful reign. Where do Inter Milan go next? We've seen Cesc Fàbregas from Como linked after a strong season there. Where do you think they look to for their next manager?
Yeah, Cesc Fàbregas is the first name Inter have in mind to replace Simone Inzaghi. Also, Roberto De Zerbi or Olympique Marseille is another name. It's different because the situation of Fàbregas is a bit more complicated because he's also shareholder of Como, of the club, so they need to work something out to get him out of Como. While Roberto De Zerbi has a 6 million release clause, so it's a bit different. You go to Marseille, you pay the money, and you have Roberto De Zerbi, so it's probably easier to get De Zerbi. But also, I wouldn't rule out other names that maybe are not being mentioned at the moment. So let's see. I think Inter will have to make a decision in the next 24, 48 hours, also because Inter as Al-Hilal, the new club of Simone Inzaghi, will be announced also in the next days, will play the FIFA World Cup, Club World Cup, starting on June 14th. So they have really no time to make the kind of decision, and I think that will happen this week.
Francesco, just finally, one of the big talking points coming into the Champions League final was the age, or the average age of the squad for Inter Milan. I think it was over 30 when you looked at the average age of the starting lineup, and certainly their squad is an ageing team when you look at who they've got playing for it. Is that and these are the ages here that you can see the age of the team. Plenty of players inside their 30s and players in their late 20s as well. How much is whoever they go for in terms of a new manager going to have to deal with this ageing squad as one of the first things that they focus on, perhaps bringing in some young blood to give them an opportunity to develop over the next couple of seasons and bring that average age down?
Yeah, a renovation was about to happen anyways, even if Inzaghi would have stayed at the club. The fact that he left probably make the process quicker, because I think about players like Francesco Cerbi, Jan Sommer, Eric Mkhitaryan, key players for Simone Inzaghi, they probably will have their future a bit change under another manager. And also, if you look at the profile of the managers we already mentioned, like Cesc Fàbregas, Roberto De Zerbi, we are looking at managers that like to develop young players, and that's probably the kind of cycle they are looking at, Inter, developing young players also for the future. Also, I think the new coach will change the future of other players at the club. I think about Davide Frattesi, for example. Davide Frattesi, I'm sure he was about to leave Inter in case Inzaghi would have stayed, because he was not happy also with the fact that he didn't play the Champions League final. He didn't have a lot of game time compared to other midfielders. So I think that, for example, the future of Davide Frattesi could really change if a new manager arrives and says, you're a key player for me. So let's see with these kind of situations, but I think a renovation will definitely happen, because that's what the American found oak tree wants for the club. They want to renovate, to have younger players, and I think that's what's going to happen this summer with the summer transfer window.
Francesco, as always, thanks for joining us here. Adam,
thank you.
Really interesting words there, Francesco. It's going to be a really interesting time at Inter. What were your first reactions to what Francesco said and also the news coming out?
I think to echo exactly what Francesco said about the fans there in Milan, I mean, if I was an Inter fan, I'd be a bit annoyed, really, with the way this has gone down. I think it was completely overshadowing the final. The fact that he was clearly, him or his representatives were fishing around to the Saudis for a new job, and obviously all of the money that comes with that. I'm sure he would say, oh, well, it wasn't me necessarily personally, it was people who were working with me and for me. But it's a bit of an indictment of modern football. That's just the way it goes. And unfortunately, it's the fans that have to bear the brunt of that. But leading up to the huge game for them this season, the fact that they were trophyless as well after having lost the Champions League final, they didn't win a single trophy this season. So much riding on that game, not just because it was the Champions League final, to put up the performance that they did, lose 5-0. The issue with the average age of the squad, because it is an ageing team, I don't think it's necessarily the worst decision in the world from Inzaghi. He's probably looked at this team and thought, well, there are natural life cycles in every football team, and now is the best time for me to move on. I know that he's got ambitions to manage the national side, and he's not going to be able to get that job straight away. It's going to be after the World Cup next year over here in the US. So I do think he's probably kind of waiting in the wings for potentially that job when it comes up next year. And so what do you do for this time? Do you stick around at Inter Milan and perhaps a team that's not going to be improving for next season, or go somewhere where you can make a lot of money like Saudi Arabia? He's probably made the right choice for him. But it will be very interesting to see who goes for this job. We mentioned the two, I think, front runners there, Cesc Fàbregas, Roberto De Zerbi. I was impressed with De Zerbi, covered him quite a lot when he was working at Brighton. He's a fiery character, but perhaps that's what this team needs. So they are two very different personalities. They're obviously very successful managers, and Fàbregas has set a very high standard at Como and managed to do a lot with them with fairly limited resources to get them up the table and secure Serie A football for next season. But I do think, although Francesco there was saying that Fàbregas is perhaps the front runner, I might be looking at De Zerbi. Maybe they need someone who, as I said, a fiery character who can really grab this team by the scruff of their neck and help and improve them next season.